Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, how you doing, everybody? It is Friday, May 25th, 2018, and it is time for yet another show. I regret to tell you, I regret to inform you, President, still Donald Trump, not really sure how that happened, but, well, neither are any of you, and much to gather in terms of stories that need reporting today, and I hadn't really planned on heading in this direction first and foremost with the show today, but we definitely have a story or two that needs to be moved to the front burner. We have plenty to catch up on, plenty to try and figure out prior to the weekend, and who even knows what could happen later on this morning. Donald Trump is awake and tweeting. It's time to answer him. I see that he has begun setting people off with the tweet that can anyone even imagine, he says, can anyone even imagine having spies, which, again, he capitalizes spies. And we did hear a report the other day. I'm going to divert from this for just a second. The report that when staff write tweets for him, they do insert random capitalizations and even spelling errors to make them seem more genuine. But it's really fairly amazing that even happens. I don't know how much credence I give the story. But anyway, can anyone even imagine having spies placed in a competing campaign by the people and party in absolute power, for this absolute power, that'll tell you something, for the sole purpose of political advantage and gain, and to think that the party in question, even with the expenditure of far more money, lost. How amazing is that? Well, it's not that difficult to imagine. Really, can anyone even imagine having spies play? Well, you're imagining it right now. I'm seeing you do it. I can't figure out why you think it's a difficult thing to do, but there's a lot that happens that most people find relatively easy and that the president finds definitely rather troubling. Let's see. His other morning tweets, his first one wasn't a rage tweet. There we are. Very nice. He'll be making the commencement address today at the United States Naval Academy. Sorry, midshipmen, but congratulations on your commissions. Look forward to being with some of the greatest people on earth. That's very nice. It's a nice thing to say. Nothing wrong with that tweet. Let's see. Then he followed it up immediately a minute later with his anger. The Democrats, I will be giving the commencement address to our naval graduates. How fantastic. They're wonderful people, by the way. Democrats are now alluding to the concept that they have an informant placed in an opposing party's campaign is different than having a capital S spy. As illegal as that may be, it is not illegal and is very different, but whatever. But what about an informant who is paid a fortune and who sets up way earlier than the Russian hoax? He didn't. The Russian hoax has been going on since the mid-2000s. But okay, whatever. Can anyone even imagine having spies placed in a competing campaign? Yes, you can. I'm seeing you do it right now. Everyone knows there was a capital S spy. Why does he capitalize spying? He's very weird. And in fact, the people who were involved in the spying were admitting that there was a spy. They aren't. Widespread spying involving multiple. I mean, it's really just amazing. And everybody it's very interesting to watch members of the press saying that they're finally, this is one that they'll call him out on and just say he's a liar because this one's particularly dangerous. But, it's really not happening. And as I'm reading you the tweets, I'm realizing, oh, yeah, aren't we supposed to be not feeding the fire by reading his stupid things out loud or passing them around or retweeting? It's hard to not do that, though. But okay, here we are. Let's see. We've got other things to catch up on. The tweets aren't particularly important, but man, it's annoying and we have to deal with it. Here's what's in pocket. I have only one article, I think, on what I guess really has to be the story of the day. Oh, no, I have more. Excellent. Fantastic. We'll get a sampling of them. Here's how it came to my attention. Last night, I saw a tweet on this, and I'm trying to think, where will I be able to come up with the original, the person who brought it to my attention? I'm not certain that I'll be able to do it anytime soon. But the story that they brought to my attention was printed in the I guess in the local papers out there in Arizona, and I did manage to get a copy of that story to read. It's since been covered by many of the other major outlets, but I want to start with the original one that sparked discussion of the story last night. E.J. Montini, writing in, I think in the Arizona papers here, which puts it on AZ Central on the interwebs. That's a USA Today site, but let's see. Does it even credit, like, what paper does E.J. Montini write for? I'm not certain which one it is, but I'll get right to the substance of the article instead. How about that? Why don't we do that? Montini's headline here: the feds lost. Yes, lost. It actually says that in the headline. The feds lost. Yes, lost. 1,475 migrant children. We lost them. We don't know where they went. How come we don't know where they went? I don't know. That's part of the problem. Now, here's the, I guess, the sort of the subheader here. E.J. Montini, it says, before announcing a plan to separate more children from families, and they do have that plan, shouldn't there be a plan to adequately protect the children? Sure, there should be. Why isn't there one? I don't know, but here's the news. The Trump administration recently announced a new Get Tough policy that will separate parents from their children if the family is caught crossing the border illegally. We did discuss this a couple of days ago, and I remarked, you listened, you probably remarked to yourself as well, even before I said it, that how extraordinarily cruel the idea is, and that I know we remarked at the time that it was as if they just added it for the cruelty, that they said they were really actually introducing this measure in order to, in their minds, to discourage further undocumented immigration. Well, if they know that we'll steal their children, they won't cross the border. Well, that's probably not true. One, I don't know if the word will reach them. And two, they are crossing the border without documentation because they're hoping against hope to beat the system. And they're probably not calculating in the cost of having their children kidnapped just because they're like, well, I'm going to a free country where our lives will be better, not a miserable dictatorship where everyone will live in oppression. I'm leaving that and going supposedly to a better place. And maybe that's the plan. Why, Trump, he's crazy like a fox, I tell you. He's going to discourage people from leaving oppressive autocratic regimes for the freedom of America by eliminating the freedoms of America and turning it into an autocratic regime. And that will equalize the pressures, I guess. And what is it? What are the laws of physics and chemistry that we're worried about here? About equalizing the pressure. Anybody remember that? I don't know. Why I want to say Gauss's law. Is that really it? Or am I just thinking of gases? And so, who's Gauss? Somebody tell me. I need a producer here and a chemist, quickly. Thank you. Anyway, there's a story here. I should stick to it. The Trump administration recently announced this new Get Tough policy that'll separate parents from their children, right? It was a big news story. So big, it overshadowed the fact that the federal government has lost 1,475 migrant children in its custody, which of course means that they are not in its custody anymore. They're supposed to be, but now they're not. And they don't know where they are. It's not that they've escaped, probably. Yeah, they got 1,000. We don't know where the kids are. There were 1,475 birthday cakes delivered, and they all had files in them, and we don't know where they are. That's not what's happening here. Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen told Congress that within 48 hours of being taken into custody, the children are transferred to the Department of Health and Human Services, which finds places for them to stay. So who's dealing with that? I don't even remember who's the Secretary of Health and Human Services these days. I mean, seriously, I literally no longer remember. Was Tom Price? Who do we replace that nut with? I'm literally going to Google it right now because this administration is a train wreck. Alex Azar. Who? Yeah. There you go. Alex M. Azar, the second. Not the first one. It's the second one. who is the Secretary of Health and Human Services. It is amazing. I wonder, just for a moment, another diversion, if Trump is doing this with his cabinet turnover so that we literally can no longer remember who's in charge of various things. Anyway, Kirstjen Nielsen, herself a replacement at Homeland Security, says that within 48 hours of the children being taken into custody, they're given over to HHS. So I guess it's their problem, is what she's trying to say. They will be separated from their parent, said Democratic Senator Kamala Harris. Just like we do in the United States every day, Nielsen replied. Yeah, by way of deflecting the horror of all this. Except that in states, right? Just like in the states, only not. It says in very, very bold letters. That's actually, I didn't know whether that was like some stylistic thing that AZ Central uses, or is that a new section heading? I believe it's a section heading. So, E.J. Montini continues then, except that in the states, unlike the federal government, the states have systems in place to better screen the people who become guardians of the children, and much better ways to keep track of those children and not lose them. Now, kids do get lost occasionally in the foster system, etc. Like, we can't really fool ourselves about that. That does happen with some regularity, but I don't think it happens to all the kids put into the system. And that's what happened, though, to 1,475 minors swept up at the border and taken into custody by the federal government, and then released from custody somehow. Gone. The Office of Refugee Resettlement reported at the end of 2017 that 7,000 plus children placed with sponsored individuals. The agency, of these 7,000, the agency didn't know where 1,475 of them were. That's a fairly significant percentage. Does anybody happen to know offhand what the percentage numbers work out to there? I've got a handy-dandy calculator, sort of, here. I think the math in it, I turned it on, it's in my phone. I think the math in it may be something else we calculated on the show once. Let's see, 1,475 of them out of 7,000. That's 21%. That is a lousy figure. More than 1 in every 5 children the Office of Refugee Resettlement has taken into custody have disappeared. We do not know where they are. Republican Senator Rob Portman said it's just a system that has so many gaps, so many opportunities. Everything's an opportunity for Republicans. So many opportunities for these children to fall between the cracks. I'm looking for an opportunity to fall between the cracks, that we just don't know what's going on. How much trafficking or abuse or simply immigration law violations are occurring? Good question. I ask because, as we were once told by the former chairman of the Tarrant County, Texas Republican Party, Trump is a child rapist. And now 1,500 children are missing. We don't know where they are. Were they sent back to Mexico? Don't know. Sold into slavery? Not sure. Thrown from helicopters into the ocean? I don't know. Nobody knows. Does that sound ridiculous? It's been done, but it hasn't happened here. It can't happen here. Yeah. Well, you tell me what happened. Donald Trump is alleged to be a child rapist, and here's 1,500 children off the books. What's happening to them? I don't know. I'm not alleging that they're in the basement of the White House. I'm not alleging that they're running a child sex trafficking ring right now. That would be irresponsible of me to do. You can go ahead and do it. It would not even really be all that irresponsible for me, though. Of course, just to borrow a headline that we shared with you listening on the show some years ago, we all knew about the trafficking, was that thing which was said about movers and shakers like Donald Trump in the teenage modeling industry. We all knew about the trafficking. Well, we don't know what's happening here, but we know that there is trafficking, and maybe some of those kids have been released to human traffickers. Maybe the sort of human traffickers that simply take money to smuggle people into the country and then drop them off and wish them the best. Maybe the kinds of human traffickers that sell the kids into slavery, sexual or otherwise. I'm not saying that I know exactly what happened to them, because no one does. But I guarantee you that there are some, like with anything, any body of people that you collect enough individual representatives of somebody in the ranks of ICE agents down on the southern border is involved in something nefarious with kids somewhere. Whether it's these kids, I don't know. Whether they're doing it on the job, I don't know. But I wouldn't be surprised, and you shouldn't be surprised either, when you find inside of, I would predict, 2 years, convictions being brought against ICE agents for child sex trafficking, and it involves some of the kids they've been snatching up at the border. Why wouldn't they be doing this? If you're ever wondered, why would you take a job like this? And why would you stay in a job like this? Well, one, you have to be an extraordinarily cruel person, true. And you have to be, for the most part, a racist bastard. Largely, that would help you, especially down at the southern border. Though there's plenty of them up at the northern border, as we recently learned. And it could also, be extraordinarily lucrative or even fun if you're a child molester, for instance. There are some strange fringe benefits, unfortunately, that are available to our ICE agents. And we know that they've been acting more or less with impunity for some time now. It shouldn't surprise anyone who has read the stories of their extraordinary cruelty and extra-legal activity. If anyone who's read about that will not be surprised to find out that eventually, very likely, we'll find out that some of these kids were certainly misdirected and for nefarious and illegal purposes by the very people who supposedly were taking these kids into custody. And by the way, taking kids or anybody into custody involves a certain amount of responsibility for the back end maintenance of the system. If you detain people, if you want to do it under color of law, one, there are, of course, minimum standards for the treatment of the people that you detain, and we're violating those left and right. Plenty of stories, and we haven't reported them, and it's been a shortcoming of our show. But it's not a main focus of it. Should be, but it hasn't been. There's just too much to fit into 2 hours of the mistreatment of migrants taken into custody anywhere, but along the southern border in particular. For that matter, the treatment of people not taken into custody who successfully make it across the border and supposedly begin on the journey towards working for a better life and find themselves in farm labor camps, which we don't monitor closely enough. So it's not that the ICE agents have the exclusive franchise on abusing migrants, certainly, but it's just, of course, somehow worse when it happens under color of law. Somehow, these are constitutional officers empowered to do this to you. They are not empowered to do this to you, but they're doing it nonetheless. And the system of redress is, beyond your reach. Believe me, whatever. I'm going to borrow the phrase from Donald Trump. Believe me, there's no way you're ever going to get made whole from this through our system. Anyway, if you're going to take people into custody and detain them under color of law, you're responsible for what happens to them. You're responsible for how you treat them, and you're responsible for processing them and not losing track of them. If you detain people, children or otherwise, take them into custody, and then don't keep records of who they are, where they are, why they are where they are, provide a means of redress for getting them out of where they are or adjudicating their case before a court of law, and instead you just ignore what happens to them and you don't care, and if whatever happens to them, unless you know or are held responsible for what happens to them, that's the difference between kidnapping somebody and detaining them under color of law. Right? If a cop comes up to you and just walks up to you on the street and hits you over the head with a baton and drags you into their car and takes you back to their house and whatever, whether he releases you at that point or presses you into domestic slavery or whatever, or just simply says, I need help moving a couch, and you can go after that, that's problematic. That's kidnapping. And it's only an arrest if they say, I hereby demand that you come with me. I detain you under color of law. You are under arrest. They notify you of your rights. You're brought to the station. You're booked. There's supposedly legal standards for how they treat you in between, but we know that those get violated all the time. That's a separate problem, but they bring you and book you and process you and put you in prison, and you get to use your one phone call that you see on television all the time to notify somebody of your detention and seek legal representation and legal redress for your detention. And that's what makes it legal versus just kidnapping. That's what the shield, the badge, and the gun and the baton are all supposed to be about, representing that this is being done under color of law. We're not simply sweeping you off the street, kidnapping you for whatever purposes. We are saying that the government has reason to detain you and that there are systems of redress in case you don't think you're being legally detained. Or perhaps you do think you're being legally detained, but you at some point need to be released to stand trial or to meet with lawyers or whatever. Or we simply don't have room for you in the jails. Sometimes that's the only reason we let people go. But yeah, if we just take people and then do whatever we want with them, whether we book them or not, if we then just say, I don't care who takes them, then what is that? I mean, I think that there's some kind of system. As it turns out, I think what might be happening, I've heard, or I've gathered from the snippets of things I've seen discussed, that they are perhaps taking the kids, processing them, taking names, transferring them to HHS, and then releasing some of them into the custody of people who claim to be responsible, legally responsible for those kids. And that's probably in the end what would save them from simple kidnapping charges. Well, we asked, who are you? I'm their uncle. Okay, now there's probably more responsibility involved than just saying, okay, sure, but under normal circumstances. But they can at least go to court, these agents, and say, or in this case, I guess HHS personnel can go and say, well, guy told me he was their uncle. I didn't know any different. Now, did you check any ID? No. Well, then you have a problem, et cetera, et cetera. But if it's just, I don't know, take however many you want, well, then you're just talking about kidnapping and trafficking and not much else. So I say we go in and crack some heads. We were law and order in this country. Let's whack some ICE agents over the head, maybe some HHS personnel, charge them with kidnapping, and see if that helps jog their memory about where the kids went. I'd like to find them. So continuing with the Montini story, a documentary from the PBS program Frontline said that the federal government has actually released some of the minors to human traffickers. That sounds like a bad plan. It's linked, so that's nice. That links to the Frontline story, as mentioned. HHS official says agency lost track of nearly 1,500 unaccompanied minors. That's where Montini is taking his cues from. Layla Miller has written this one for Frontline. And, yeah, I mean, it just blurts out right up top here in a photo caption. In this August 11, 2017 photo, U.S. Customs and Border Patrol agents pick up immigrants suspected of crossing into the United States illegally. And right underneath, I thought there was more information in that caption than there really was. But, yeah, this is the story. We'll have to read through this one, too, and see on what basis the claim is made that there were releases to human traffickers. Well, we'll take their word for it at the moment just to follow along with Montini's narrative. Imagine that, he says, just as the president does. And now we want to dramatically ramp up the number of children who are removed from their parents. Well, when pressed about safety concerns, Secretary Nielsen said, I just want to say, I couldn't agree more with your concerns, period. We owe more to these children to protect them. That's nice. So I'm saying I agree. We've taken steps and we will continue to strengthen what our partners do to protect these children. I mean, what else is she going to say, right? There are 1,475 reasons not to be reassured by the Secretary's promise. If anything, it would have been better to have a policy in place with protections and safe places to stay and safe people to stay with and personnel on the government payroll to check up on them before the administration's new policy was implemented. Again, I have to pause once more just to point out that, again, The Trump administration, to the extent that it is one, and it's really hanging on by a thread at this point. It's not even hanging on. The real huge problem with it, and what they illustrate most clearly, is the idiocy of why don't you just governance. I mean, that's what's happening here. And that's what was, by the way, glossed over or glamorized by, I guess you have to blame the press corps on this one, as populism, like blue collar, middle class populism. Why don't you just governance? I've referred to it before in the past, so many of you who are longtime listeners will understand what the hell I'm talking about when I say that. When you suggest simplistic, stupid answers to extraordinarily complex problems, they don't even necessarily appear like complex problems, and the simplistic answers don't even feel that simplistic either. And I mean, we engage in it too. Like, why don't you just have a plan in place to do something about this? Like, that's simplistic all by itself. But this is the main danger of handing governance over to people who are why don't you justers. And the answer is, we've thought about just XYZ. The problem is, how do you do it on a grand scale? But imagine somewhere along the line, there's people that, why don't you just separate them and then we'll put them in a safe place? Well, what safe place? With whom? How will you screen it? How many are you going to have? How many families does that mean you're going to need? Are you saying put them in the foster care system? Because that's no great shakes either. And do you have the capacity? How do you know whether you'll have the capacity? How many kids are you going to have? Do you have enough families? How do you screen them? Are you going to spend any time? You can't just turn this around in 45 minutes like some sort of North Korea denuclearization summit, right? Another sort of thing that Donald Trump just thinks he can make snap decisions and the government will take care of things. And it doesn't work like that. It never has, and he doesn't know that because he's too stupid. Sorry. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see. How much more Montini have we got? Not that much, so we might as well get through it, and then we can get to some of the comments and some, catch up on some what we'll call disclaimers along the way and demonstrate why the Trump administration appears to be that much worse than any prior administration, who were also, like I said, no great shakes prior to the installation of Donald Trump. So, okay, at least we know Secretary Nielsen couldn't agree more. And as Montini finishes up here, there are 1,475 reasons not to be reassured by the Secretary's promise. Don't you think it would have been a good idea to have a plan in place before implementing this policy? Yes, sure. Normally, yes. But these are not normal times, right? So here we resume with Montini. Secretary Nielsen said, "My decision has been that anyone who breaks the law will be prosecuted." That's her decision. There you go, everybody. "If you are a parent or you're a single person or if you happen to have a family, if you cross between the ports of entry, we will refer you for prosecution. You have broken U.S. law." We get all of that, Montini says, and we all want a secure border. I don't even care. But we don't want to trade in our humanity in the process. As Senator Portman told Frontline, "We've got these kids. They're here. They're living on our soil. And for us to just, assume someone else is going to take care of them and throw them to the wolves," which is what HHS was doing, "is flat out wrong. I don't care what you think about immigration policy. It's wrong." "He's right," says Montini. "And to what effect?" "Nothing. None. Senator Portman is satisfied at having made a humanitarian statement, and the kids are gone." So, To continue with this topic, because you're going to have to, the Warlock asks this important question: which human traffickers? I don't know. And I am hoping that someone else does. And I can offer you only this. I told you that there was a linked story. Let's take a look at the Frontline story and see if we can get the lowdown on all of this. HHS officials say... Well, HHS official says, one official says, agency lost track of nearly 1,500 unaccompanied minors. That's the headline on the Layla Miller Frontline piece here. A top official from the Department of HHS came under fire during congressional testimony on Thursday. This is actually back in late April. So I don't know exactly which Thursday it is, but late April. Over how the agency tracks unaccompanied minors after they are released to family or other sponsors inside the United States. Again, by the way, a comment on the volume of horrible news and the distraction factors. I guess we had testimony given to Congress in late April that there were 1,500 kids missing from the system, and it is now late May, and those of us who consider ourselves news junkies and progressive critics of the administration are only now sorry and angry about this one. Well, you all saw Taken. How long do those kids have if they're being trafficked by sex slavers? Not 30 days. We can tell you that. So what about that? What about the possibility that some significant portion of those kids are just dead because of our neglect? Oh, wells. We wanted to get tough on the border. P.S. My really smart-looking hat says I was just trying to do the best I could for America. Stephen Wagner, the acting assistant secretary of the agency's Administration for Children and Families, I guess should be hanged, but we won't do that in this country, don't worry, due process, yada yada, faced a barrage of questions from senators on the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations over why HHS does not track unaccompanied minors who fail to appear at their immigration court hearings. Now, just as a matter of tough immigration policy, you would think they would be tracking them, maybe because the president, the guy who claims to be president right now, campaigned on, we are so stupid, we don't even track people, so I'm going to do that. So then he doesn't. But why would he? If you track them, then there's no source of fresh meat, right? So don't track them. I'll say I tracked them, say it's stupid that the government, the other one, the Obama guy, doesn't track them, and we'll sell them. And probably no one will figure it out. And if they do, we'll say, well, they broke the law. That's the system we've set up for ourselves here. Okay. The agency has faced increased scrutiny following a scathing 2016 report from the committee that found it failed to protect unaccompanied minors from traffickers and other abuses. And so, yes, it should be said at some point that the Obama administration, more than just no great shakes on immigration, they were actually actively pretty terrible, but there wasn't this element of open racism that we have under the Trump administration. But, does a trafficked child care whether the people who sold them are racist or not? I don't know. I doubt it very much. Do I know that there was trafficking going on during the Obama administration? I guess I don't. I guess I don't know it necessarily now, but Warlock, you and I are going to find out at the same time. It's just a system that has so many gaps, again, so many opportunities. Remember that? I guess that was a quote from a month ago. For these children to fall between the cracks that we don't know what's going on, how much trafficking or abuse or simply immigration law violations are occurring, said the committee's Republican chairman, Senator Rob Portman. In 2014, that I think is before Trump. It's hard to track these things. In 2014, at least 10 trafficking victims, including 8 minors, were discovered during a raid by federal and local law enforcement in Portman's home state of Ohio. Not Arizona, not New Mexico, not Texas, not California, not Montana, where I think it was that the ICE agent got all upset that he heard someone use Spanish words at some point and how horrible that was, but in Ohio. Now, 10 is less than 1,475. But we don't know that all 1,475 ended up in the hands of traffickers. That's true. 10's too many, but it's less. As Frontline examined in the recent documentary Trafficked in America, and I guess if you can't wait for me to get around to the answer, or even if there's no answer in this article about which traffickers, Warlock, you should go watch Trafficked in America at pbs.org. pbs.org, I suppose you could search it there. You can follow your links if you want. But HHS, anyway, it says in this documentary, had released several minors to the traffickers. The committee said the case was due to policies and procedures that were, quote, inadequate to protect children in the agency's care. So I think we were supposed to have been outraged since 2014, and we didn't do it. But it's hard to play that game. How long are you outraged right now? Does that mean you're not outraged about Syria? You scumbag, what's wrong with you? How dare you turn your attention to something else? You could see we're running on overdraft on everything here. After unaccompanied minors arrive in the United States, often to reunite with family members or to flee violence or poverty in their home countries, or maybe trafficking, for instance, they are typically transferred from Border Patrol or Customs officers to the custody of HHS, as Secretary Nielsen told us, which often reunites the minors with a relative or another sponsor. That's a good outcome, I think. The department is supposed to place check-in phone calls 30 days after a minor's placement. But during the hearing, Wagner acknowledged gaps in that system. Between October 2016 and December 2017, he said, the agency was unable to locate almost 1,500 out of the 7,635 minors that it attempted to reach, or about 19%. Okay, I guess there's another 635 minors in this figure. We were working with 1,475 out of 7,000. And now here they reported as almost 1,500 out of 7,635. But now that we have some more exact numbers, why don't we do it again? 1,475, although that sounds like an estimate too, out of 7,635. I'm sure they're right. I'm just checking the math. Yeah. 19.3%. It pays to check math, especially now as Elon Musk is accusing all journalists of innumeracy. I see out there circulating in another story we likely won't cover, but you've probably heard something about. By the way, innumeracy, a real thing, and an interesting book. I had to read it. It was on my first year summer reading list at what is now the Antonin Scalia School of Law at George Mason University, arch-conservative law school. But it really was a good book. I recommend it to you. Innumeracy. Plus also, by the way, The Economic Way of Thinking was actually on my summer reading list too. I told you that it was a law and economics curriculum. Didn't believe me? The only books we had to read were about economics and innumeracy prior to beginning law school. I thought that was actually a very interesting reading list. It's a good reading list for everybody, especially if you are going into an indoctrination immersion program like I was. So, about 19% between, well, really between the election and the end of the first year of the Trump administration. 1,475 out of 7,635 minors that it attempted to reach were unreachable. That's actually, I think, a fairly significantly different story from 1,500 children were sold into sex slavery. Yes, maybe we have overstated the case. Sponsors are meant to ensure that minors show up at their immigration hearings. Senator Claire McCaskill pressed Wagner on why more than half of unaccompanied minors in 2017 did not show up to their immigration hearings. That's a high number, too. When asked how HHS tracks the missing children, Wagner said that finding out whether children have attended their immigration hearing is not a part of its protocol. Interesting. I mean, we're so stupid in this country. Why do you not track? Well, HHS, Health and Human Services, though they are humans and we were responsible for their health, I could see why tracking whether or not they show up at immigration hearings isn't HHS protocol. That should probably be immigration protocol. But again, you see how complex some of these issues really are, right? Why don't you just blah, blah, blah. All right, well, we need to have a plan in place. Well, then make a plan. Well, how do you do it? I mean, clearly seizing kids at the border is the province, even if it shouldn't be, of ICE. and that's under Homeland Security. But once you've got the kids, you separate them from their families, and you're saying, we're dealing with kids. The Homeland Security Department has no infrastructure for the care of unaccompanied minors, but Health and Human Services, I mean, even if they don't, are probably closer to the mark. Here's what we'll do. The right hand of Homeland Security will hand these kids over to the left hand of Health and Human Services. It's all the federal government, all one big happy family. So we should be okay here. And we're not. Gap number one is created. But already you have two agencies, two or entirely separate departments involved. And probably each one of those departments has 5 different agencies and bureaus involved in those things. So that's even more gaps. You can see how this becomes complex. You can see how problems would arise that would even result in a diligent group of civil servants actually losing a lot of these kids. Particularly, remember, these are kids that don't have any particular reason to want to stay trackable by the federal government, in addition to all the other challenges involved in this. So let's see, where were we? A new agreement reached this month. Or perhaps I should read all of the rest of this. It's not part of their protocol, was where we left off, right? We do not know who is showing up and who isn't, he said. We don't know these kids. We don't follow up to ensure they go to the hearing. Well, we should know these kids. They are in your custody at this point. But I could see why you wouldn't necessarily collect information on whether or not they go to the hearing. But really, I suppose you should know all you can about them. And what harm would it do if you also collected the information or solicited the information from whoever's job it was to collect it, like Homeland Security? But again, you see why going into, well, just take the kids and put them in a separate place isn't really a policy. It's why don't you just ism, and it doesn't work. Wagner told the committee, and you know what's interesting? I mean, it really doesn't work. Before I even continue, I can't read through an entire article on stuff like this. It's got so much garbage in it. I'm sorry. I apologize. Was it, I can't remember whether it was Gil or Gideon who rightly, I think, complained the other day. You make it impossible to follow the show. Just either read the articles or do the commentary, not both at the same time. I can't help it. I'm too manic for this stuff. And this drives everybody up the wall, I think. Not this practice. Some people like the commentary, but these stories, how can you read through it and not throw the paper down in disgust and start screaming when you read it? If you can do it, I need you on the show as a co-host. Okay. But again, this is why this type of governance doesn't work. And yet when you say so, egghead, elitist, libtard, coastal elite, blah, 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 and accomplices in the press who say, you see, this is why Trump won. Eggheads like you who say everything is complex, everything has nuance, everything is complicated. Oh, it's too complicated. Just take the kids. They crossed the border. It's illegal. They should be in jail. All right. What jail? I don't know. Whatever. Okay. How many jail workers do you need in order to feed all these kids? Make sure the plumbing is working in each of the cells. How much is that going to cost? Where are you going to get the people? I don't know. Of course, if I ask for anything, any kind of government program, they're first, who's going to pay for all this? Right? Is Mexico going to pay for this? They're not paying for any of the other things they're supposed to pay for. They never were gonna. What about it? Just on a cost basis. You want to be a heartless, fiscal conservative? Fine. Where are the jails? Who's going to clean them? Who's going to feed the people? Who washes the dishes? Are there extra guards that are necessary? Do you need more beds? Do you need more anything? Clothes, books, little hammers for kids to break rocks with, whatever. You know, OSHA says they need eye protection if they're going to be chipping away at rocks. Okay, fine. You know, really though, that's what goes into even a why don't you just. At some level, somebody's got the job of how do I make this happen? I don't care. It's not my problem. And that's it. You don't care. You don't care. You don't know. Now you elect somebody who's the same way and he's got, you know, no allegiance to the United States, for one thing, and he thinks he's got enough FU money to do whatever the hell he wants in life, or, you know, he's become convinced of that, even though he's bankrupt, that he can do anything he wants and crap in a gold toilet to boot. He's not going to care that his solutions don't work, or that they hurt people, or that they diminish the status of the United States of America, or undermine our authority in the world, or undermine everything about America and the American experiment from top to bottom. That doesn't bother him. He's hardly American to begin with. So he'll do that stuff. And for the rest of the press to tell me now, you're the reason, your objection to programs that don't work and because they're not well thought out actually hurt America and kill people. That's elitist to worry about that. You're the reason Trump got elected. I'm not. No, I refuse to believe that. I cannot help you with that. I don't know why he got elected, but I can tell you that he shouldn't have. And the reason he shouldn't have is he's an idiot, and his approaches to every problem will only make things worse. But America is not only filled with people who don't think very much about the things that they wish were happening, but we make them feel like they know what they're talking about because we travel thousands of miles to interview them at their bars and restaurants and diners and celebrate them as the salt of the earth and geniuses with whom we should be consulting on complex matters of federal policy. And if you dare say, that's not a policy, or who's going to pay for it? Just like they always ask, well, you're a liberal elitist and we can't stand you anymore. And by the way, aren't you convinced now that you were the reason that this happened? No, I'm not. I'm convinced I'm the reason that there were such things as normal times, which even you journalists will now acknowledge we're not in. I built the normal times. You took it apart and handed it to the people who never understood what was going on when things were normal, and let them turn the United States into fantasy camp for Donald Trump. What good is that? I'm getting a little further afield. The Frontline story was where we last were, right? Wagner told the committee that since February 2016, HHS has gone to greater lengths to verify the identity of potential sponsors of unaccompanied minors. That's nice. And worked to crack down on the ability of sponsors to use fraudulent documents during the placement process. Well, wow. So, okay. What's our problem here? If we address it in the politically correct term, undocumented immigration, right? The problem is they're undocumented. That's why we don't allow them into the country. Okay. And so now we have these kids. Why don't we give them to people who, I don't know, don't have correct documents? Really? I mean, this is like finding out that Donald Trump's email server is unsecure, his phone is unsecure, but her emails. This is all a problem of checking documentation. We're going to crack down on that. If you don't have your documentation, we're going to arrest you and take your kids from you and give them to other people who don't have documentation. That's our program. Why? Because it's why don't you just-ism. Okay, good result. A new agreement reached this month between HHS, and that would be last month, and the Department of Homeland Security. Can we get these two to agree? Establishes policies for the agencies to better share information to help screen potential sponsors. That sounds like a good idea. Senators also expressed concern that state and local officials are not usually notified when unaccompanied minors are placed in their jurisdiction. Wagner said that it was an issue of practicality that would require contacting a substantial list of local agencies. Again, why don't you just-ism fails us again. We're not notifying local jurisdictions because that would be hard. Why would it be hard? Because there's a lot of kids. That would mean a lot of contacts to a lot of local agencies. Yup, it's a tough system. The question of what should we do with the federal government has kidnapped 7,500 children, and we want to dispose of them safely. We want to actually take care of them. Why don't you just, what? Why don't I just what? Why don't you just, what? Sell them on eBay. Bring them to a large auditorium and bring them up one at a time and have them stand on a granite block. And whoever wants to pay the most to the federal government to take care of them can do it. They can look at the kids and see, how much do I want to say I'm going to pay the federal government for this kid? How's his teeth? Is he strong? Can he work? Is that a system for disposing of it? What do you propose we do? I don't know. We'll use the infrastructure already in place. Okay. There is an infrastructure already in place. Does the infrastructure include telephones? Why don't we call people and say, I tell you what, this is amazing thinking about this. Well, we don't notify local officials when unaccompanied minors are placed in their jurisdiction. How do we place them there? Like a person says, I live in Parma, Ohio, and I'll take one of these kids. Okay, fine. Let me write that down. Parma, Ohio. Now, pick up the phone and call whoever supervises the foster care system in Parma, Ohio, whatever county that is. What county is it? Cuyahoga County? I don't know. You tell me. Is that a good guess? I think so. Hey, we just put a foster kid in your system. Now, again, there's only 7,500. That's a lot of phone calls, but it's not like it's 7 million. But look at this. Why don't you justism resulting in this? I don't know why we don't call anybody. It's an issue of practicality. The federal government doesn't have enough people to make 7,500 phone calls. If a child is being, for instance, kept at home and abused by a sponsor, and a local school doesn't even know the child is supposed to be going there, then some of the usual triggers we have for protecting children can't be triggered, Senator Maggie Hassan of New Hampshire said. Yeah, that's true. Wagner agreed to look into notifying states and localities. Now, there's only 50 states. How many phone calls does that take? As did James McCament, the Deputy Undersecretary for the Office of Strategy, Policy, and Plans. How do you like that? At the Department of Homeland Security. Okay, the Department of Homeland Security is going to be responsible for this why don't you just issue here. Who should we ask to come up with the plan to make the why don't you just idea work? How about the Office of Plans? Yes, that would be a great place to start. Why don't you just, start at the Office of Plans and ask that guy to make a plan, some sort of strategy or plan for our policy. Maybe you could find someone in the Office of Strategy, Policy, and Plans. Yes, I think I probably could. Throughout the session, senators grew frustrated, as I am, that more than a year had passed since the two agencies had agreed to deliver a joint memo outlining their roles in protecting minors. It has been protracted, absolutely, said McCament of the Office of Strategy, Policy, and Plans. Get this done, Senator Thomas Harper of Delaware told officials from both agencies. Way too much time has passed. Imagine that being said in another voice. So, get this done. Way too much time has passed. It doesn't sound quite as intelligent now, does it? It really wasn't much of anything, even when Harper said it. In an interview with Frontline for Trafficked in America, Portman, senator, said that HHS cannot ignore its responsibility for unaccompanied minors. That is a bold statement. We've got these kids, he said. They're here. They're living on our soil, and for us to just, assume someone else is going to take care of them and throw them to the wolves, which is what HHS was doing, is flat out wrong. I don't care what you think about immigration policy. It's wrong. Long story short for the Warlock, this doesn't say which traffickers either. So that's rather troubling as well, and maybe it's clearer in the documentary Trafficked in America. I hope somebody has an answer to all this. I'm sort of interested in clicking on the link and seeing what they have over there. It's the pbs.org, and, it's WGBH Frontline. All right, but you'll find it, I'm sure, if you search or Google for Trafficked in America. Pardon me as I battle the frogs yet still in my throat. That's, by the way, season 36, episode 9 of Frontline, if you think you can find it easier that way. But here's some idea of what might be in here. The description of the episode. Frontline and the investigative reporting program at UC Berkeley, thanks very much, guys, tell the inside story of Guatemalan teens forced to work against their will on an egg farm in Ohio. So that's how we get the Ohio connection here. An egg farm. Well, that's, not good. It's not sex trafficking outright. I mean, I don't know what goes on in the egg farm. I guess bigger questions about that. And quite honestly, suppose I had decided to call Comet Pizza an egg farm. Would anybody have turned around with their AR-15s? No, guys, don't check here for the child sex predation network that you found to be rumored online at 4chan or wherever. This is not Comet Pizza. It's Comet Egg Farm. I mean, okay, you say it's an egg farm. What do you do after hours? Because, oh, by the way, the rest of the features here suggested for frontline viewers, I guess, are, let's see, Rape on the Night Shift, a January 16th, 2018 episode, a joint investigation into the sexual abuse of immigrant women in the janitorial industry. How do you like that? I mean, nobody likes that, obviously. Rape in the Fields, June 25th report, June 25th, 2013. Lowell Bergman, it says, investigates the hidden reality of rape on the job for immigrant women working in America's fields, farms, and factories, like maybe even egg farms. And April 24th of this year, Lila Miller's other effort here, why labor trafficking is so hard to track. I don't know. Why don't you just track it, right? Well, I guess it's actually pretty difficult to do. All right, well, time now for our second break. We're just going to take a quick 1 minute to catch our breath. And before we run out the door, I guess the breaking news that broke while I was ranting about this story, and here's all you have to know about it. Harvey Weinstein has surrendered to the New York Police Department on charges related to the sexual assault allegations that helped launch the Me Too movement. That's how Axios reports it, because they got to have a second news hook, I guess. It's not enough to know who Harvey Weinstein is and why he reported to the New York Police Department on charges of sexual assault. But, throw the Me Too movement in there. And why not? I mean, credit them for driving the narrative to the point where Harvey Weinstein finally has to surrender. Okay, we'll take this break and return after this. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I guess before we completely wrap up with this story, I will bring to your attention the tweet of Jordan Weissman. Jordan Weissman writes about the economy, healthcare, taxes, and more for Slate. And he has this to say, and I think I happen to have seen it at the time retweeted by David Dayan. This story. He's retweeting the tweet of Todd N. Tucker, a PhD fellow at the Roosevelt Institute, who notes the following, in case you were thinking that I may have overstated the case, like I actually think I may have overstated the case, about the trafficking threats at ICE. And to be honest, I mean, well, like we said, we don't know what happened to 1,475 of them, and maybe they were all brought to amusement parks and fed ice cream and pizza. Or perhaps some number of them were not. But you're supposed to know where they are for the very purpose of ensuring that you don't have any questions and you don't have any worries about what's happening to them. And, maybe we're imagining things. Maybe we're imagining the worst. Todd Tucker tweets this little tidbit here. Oh, and he's retweeting somebody else. Where does this chain of custody end here? Antonio Olivo, who, let's see, what's his identification? Politics, Government, Demographics et al. In Nova, that would be Northern Virginia, sometimes elsewhere, for the Washington Post. There we are. Antonio Olivo. Here, I'm going to do the whole chain here. Whoops. Dang it. Just click on the wrong thing. An ACLU report. We've got to go even further back in the chain of custody here. ACLU report depicts abuses unaccompanied minors face after seeking refuge in the U.S. We're actually sort of interested in that. A Washington Post story about that ACLU report, and that out Wednesday. Before I knew of this story, despite the fact that people in Congress, those layabout losers that don't know how to do anything and are never clued in on just what the hell's going on in this country, and all they do is make empty demands and write sternly worded letters. Yeah, those guys knew about this problem a month ago, I just found out about it today. I'm super smart. They're super lazy. You figure it out. Everything's complicated, everybody. All right, well, let me get to the heart of what Todd Tucker and Jordan Weissman were saying, and then we'll see if we want to double back on the ACLU report. Todd says ICE agents, quote, allegedly used stun guns on the miners for amusement or punishment. I think that's very interesting. Punishment, or I would have switched that, like they use stun guns on the miners for punishment or just for amusement, kicked them and threatened to either rape or kill them. In other words, Abu Ghraib right here in the good old United States of America. Yeehaw. Now that, I guess, is a story that comes from the ACLU report about which the Washington Post was reporting on Wednesday. So Todd says ICE agents using stun guns on the miners just for fun, kicking them, threatening to rape or kill them. And Jordan Weissman of Slate says this happened during the Obama administration. It's not just Trump letting them loose. The whole agency is rotten to its core. I'm not certain whether Jordan means that the stun guns and rape threats happened under the Obama administration, but that would not surprise me if it also happened then. Or whether, when he says it's not just Trump letting them loose, you mean the problem with what we do with these kids is not just the problem of Trump letting them loose. It's also the problem of ICE during the Obama administration, but not in the Trump administration, using stun guns and kicking kids and threatening to rape them, or everybody's been doing this, or what? But I guess that brings us to the story on the ACLU report, if we want to take a look at that one. ACLU alleges that immigrant minors were mistreated in custody during Obama years. There we are. May 23rd, unaccompanied minors who crossed the U.S.-Mexico border during the historic wave of migration earlier this decade were repeatedly beaten, sexually abused, and deprived of food and medical care by federal border agents, according to an American Civil Liberties Union report released Wednesday. By the way, I guess credit, therefore, to those progressive activists who have been shouting at every opportunity, even when they appeared to be shouting into the wind, abolish ICE. It's a huge problem and was one under the Obama administration. And that could lead us to another 2-hour plus discussion of the Obama approach to issues like this. Like, well, if I just, maybe I look the other way, and allow for get tough policies in immigration, because if I do that, then maybe some radical right-wing wackos will learn to like me and stop thinking I'm pro-illegal immigrant. Well, that was never going to happen, and you find that out now at the cost of American Abu Ghraib-style torture. Okay, well, I don't know. We couldn't get him to do that much about actual Abu Ghraib torture either, so I guess that comes as no surprise. Look, have no heroes. That's the bottom line. I don't get excited about individual politicians hardly ever for any reason whatsoever, because it's a waste of time. It doesn't mean you don't pay attention to politics. It doesn't mean you don't follow it and follow it passionately. It doesn't mean you don't cast your votes passionately. It's just not necessarily because I love this person for whom I'm voting. Don't get into that. It's not worth it. About 30,000 pages, Antonio Olivo's article continues, of documents obtained by the ACLU through an open records lawsuit depicted a gauntlet, believe it or not, of alleged mistreatment for the tens of thousands of children who arrived mainly from Central America between 2009 and 2014 during the Obama administration. Many were seeking asylum in the United States after fleeing death threats and violence in their homelands. U.S. Customs and Border Protection agents allegedly used stun guns on the minors for amusement or punishment, kicked them and threatened to either rape or kill them. No paperwork necessary on any of that. Shoot them, you got to fill out a report. The ACLU report, or kill them. I mean, if you threaten to kill them, nothing. Well, you don't want to report that. That's bad for you. Kill them, well, we have to write up a story about how they died. The ACLU report, which is based on emails, they're emails, complaint forms, and investigative reports, says agents routinely kept minors in detention cells with frigid temperatures, forcing them to sleep on concrete floors. When the complaints were filed to the Department of Homeland Security, they were largely dismissed. the ACLU said, revealing what the advocacy group described as, quote, a culture of impunity among federal government agents charged with protecting immigrant children in their custody. So without leveling whataboutist charges, I think it's fair to say this has been a problem for a long time, and the dynamics that make it a problem are worth a look once in a while, even if they're as stupid as, well, if I crack down hard on immigration, I'll be immune from recriminations about the immigration issue. You will never be. It doesn't matter. They will make up recriminations if they need to. Literally. That's another of today's stories. Remind me. See if we can get back to that one. You have no clear sense of how or whether these agents were reprimanded, said Astrid Dominguez, director of the ACLU's Regional Center for Border Rights. CPB officials called the organization's conclusions unfounded and baseless, noting that most of the claims cited in the report were ruled unfounded by DHS. Well, there you go. They were ruled. These allegations were investigated and dismissed, and sometimes that will happen, by the Office of the Inspector General for a reason, DHS spokesman, Katie Waldman said. I don't know Katie. I got nothing to do with Katie. I have no relation that I am aware of with Katie. Blame Paul Waldman for this one. Packaging dozens of patently baseless allegations and calling it a report does not change the fact that it's just a collection of patently baseless allegations. Is this a current DHS employee, I guess? In other words, could it be blamed on the Trump administration is the question. The report ignores improvements in oversight. Huh? That's too bad. Don't ignore the improvements in oversight made since 2014, including stricter guidelines on use of force and a zero-tolerance policy on sexual abuse, CPB said. It's a mile and a half between policy and practice, of course. It also disregards the fact that the DHS Inspector General's office, responding to previous complaints of abuse, conducted unannounced site visits to 41 CPB facilities in 2014 and found no improprieties, the agency said. CPB takes seriously all allegations of misconduct, but without new specifics is unable to commence reasonable steps, or even unreasonable ones, I guess, to examine these assertions and address the accusations levied, Dan Hetledge, a CPB spokesman, said in a statement. And at some level you wonder, well, I mean, if we investigate and we find nothing, if we literally do unannounced visits to 41 CPB facilities and find no improprieties there, what do we go on? I can understand that as a claim. I don't know if I credit it as a claim, but I understand why, if you were to credit it, or felt for purposes of, judicial conduct that you were obligated to credit it, I could see why it might go nowhere. The ACLU initially sought the documents used in the report in a public records request. When that request was denied, the organization filed the lawsuit, eventually gaining access to the records. Nearly 134,000 unaccompanied minors have entered DHS custody since the fall of 2014, according to federal statistics. Recently, the Trump administration has proposed new regulations for how those minors should be treated, including stripping some federal asylum protections from them if they reconnect with an adult relative in the United States, which DHS argues would mean they are no longer unaccompanied minors. That's some kind of catch-22 for you, by the way. If you actually find a family member who's willing to take care of you, then you don't need asylum anymore, because you're no longer an unaccompanied minor. But that doesn't really solve my problem, does it? ACLU attorney Mitra Ebadolahi, I'm going to guess at the emphasis there, said the records obtained through the lawsuit indicate that DHS investigators often took agents' word over the children's. In one case, closing an investigation after one group of agents said they couldn't remember their accuser. That's it. Some of the reports were filed by service providers who saw bruises on the children or heard their stories. These are allegations that span across multiple years, multiple states, involving children from different backgrounds, Ebadolahi said. Boy, I'm sorry if I'm mangling your name. The consistency to them, to us, indicates that there's truth there. And this is the case with almost all child abuse stories and cases. The report describes a pattern of behavior that ranges from neglectful to sadistic. We want to do something about both, but particularly the sadistic. In one case, an agent allegedly pushed his stun gun into a boy's stomach, shocking him, then kneed him twice in the same spot. In another, a 16-year-old girl being held just outside Phoenix claimed that an agent forcibly spread her legs and touched her private parts so hard that she screamed. Well, there you go. That's the sex trafficking we're worried about. I knew that was happening somewhere. I figured you'd eventually find that article or that claim. I thought it might take you 2 years, but here you go. It took you 15 minutes. One boy was allegedly forced to strip down to his boxers inside one of the cold detention cells, widely known among undocumented immigrants as hierlas, or freezers. Another teen who had swam across the Rio Grande claimed he was placed in a frigid cell while still wearing wet clothes. A 16-year-old girl held in a California detention center with the baby she had brought with her recounted how an agent stood at the cell door and calmly threatened to rape her and then place her child in foster care. We saw so many reports of physical abuse, both violent and humiliating, said Nabila Makboul, a University of Chicago law school student who helped compile the report. Makboul cited claims of minors being forced to sign voluntary deportation orders under the threat of rape or injury and of being denied medical care. The ACLU claimed CBP forces have increased steadily over the past decade without proper training. Why don't you just hire more? Well, how much does it cost? Well, we'll give you money for that. Why don't you train them? Well, that'll cost money too, but we'll provide the money for that. Okay, who gets to do the training? The lowest bidder, of course. Sounds great. Currently, the agency has about 21,000 Border Patrol agents, up from 17,500 in 2008, federal statistics show. Fatigue among agents in the face of so many arriving unaccompanied minors could have also led to misconduct, the report says. It could have. That's true. In one 2014 email, a federal inspector asks whether it is worth investigating a complaint filed by a minor who said he had been kept in a detention center for 4 days and witnessed another child emerge from a holding cell with bruised arms and lips. Are we sure we want to open this, given the huge amount of more serious complaints we have? The email read. Another interesting twist on the problem. So there you go. I just thought I would share that ACLU, or rather the Washington Post's coverage of the ACLU report with you so that you could be up to speed with, or check all the references that were in that first article. There are many more, as I mentioned, but we are not going to be able to get through all of them and still cover other ground. But I think you're now sort of up to speed with that story. And as I mentioned, there's a couple others on the same topic, but I'll sort of compile them and we'll put them together and make them available for your weekend reading. All right, let's see. Man, there's a lot of other ones. A New York Times piece here. Federal agencies lost track of nearly 1,500 migrant children placed with sponsors. There's the Montini piece, and then there's, I think, at least one more. Yes, one more aspect to all this that I guess we'll add, even though I was hoping to jump off of this topic, but maybe this will take us over to the break, and then we'll shift gears then. But really a follow-up to a report we heard earlier. Donald Trump is very angry with Kirstjen Nielsen at the Department of Homeland Security. Remember the report we read that she was so upset why she almost quit her job because she was yelled at by Donald Trump, and I have no doubt that that was the case, in front of everybody at a cabinet meeting. And that could be humiliating, and you should quit, but you didn't, and I'm not sure why. We're closed. Trump vents his anger over immigration at Homeland Security Secretary. Now, again, I guess, because this is a new report from yesterday's paper, Josh Dawsey and Nick Miroff, reporting for the Washington Post. She's looking a little red-eyed and teary here, and not because women cry when they're yelled at work, but because everybody would be upset and humiliated at being yelled at by Donald Trump and having to sit there and take it rather than being able to have, say, the freedom that you and I have to say, F you, you bastard, right back to his face, although I don't know how much longer we're going to have that one. Anyway, seems she's being abused as well. And, well, you know how patterns of abuse go. So now everyone in her custody is getting abused as a result. President Trump began berating Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen in the Oval Office earlier this spring. We already heard about this, right? According to administration officials, griping about her performance and blaming her for a surge in illegal border crossings. Chief of Staff John F. Kelly, who installed her in the job, jumped in to defend her. The two men, Trump and Kelly, then sparred over Nielsen as she silently watched. At one point, Trump noted the border numbers were lower under Kelly, that is, I guess, people crossing the border, and wondered aloud why Nielsen could not perform as well, according to these officials, who spoke on a condition of anonymity to describe that private meeting. Once again, simplistic, idiotic, why don't you just-ism by Dotard J. Trump. The numbers were lower before, why can't you do the same? Well, that was really up to the number, that was up to the people who were coming here. That week, more people came, and the other week, less people came. Why don't you just make them not want to, I mean, what is she supposed to do? And the answer is in the quote that they grab from Trump and put in the headline. Another idiotic, simplistic, why don't you just approach to a complex problem. What does Trump think is the answer to illegal immigration? To stand at the border and yell, we're closed. And if that doesn't work, I'll put a wall and it's going to be great and beautiful and see-through and transparent so you don't get hit in the head with drugs. I mean, duh. We're closed? America's closed. Go away. Why don't we run America like a business? Well, we're closed. Come back at 9 o'clock in the morning. As illegal crossings are once more on the rise. Whose fault is that? Trump's, right. Trump's the president, isn't he? No, it's Kirstjen Nielsen's problem. And as illegal crossings once more on the rise, and Trump hears a cascade of criticism. You suck. You're lazy. I hate your guts. That's the cascade. From conservative ally. Oh, I'm not a conservative ally. All right. Well, Trump hears a cascade of criticisms from conservative allies. Nielsen finds herself on the receiving end of the president's visceral anger about immigration, seeing the issue as the reason he won in 2016. Economic anxiety, I thought, but maybe not. And a key to his politicking ahead of the midterm elections. The president has chastised her on several occasions this spring, including a much-publicized meeting earlier this month when he attacked her in front of the entire cabinet. They were asleep. Don't worry about it. He has grown furious because his administration has grown furious, hasn't he? Because his administration has made little progress building the border wall. Why? Why is that? I thought Mexico, they're going to want it fast, aren't they? Paying for it. And his most ardent supporters have blamed Nielsen for not doing more to halt the caravan of Central American migrants whose advance Trump saw as a personal challenge, because he sees everything as a personal everything. I own this country. This is a personal challenge. He has also seen her as a proxy for Kelly, whose relationship with the president has frayed in recent months. Trump has decided, according to several aides, that Nielsen is a George W. Bush kind of Republican, the worst in his view. Wow. Nielsen has complained that it is almost an impossible task working for Trump, so quit. According to administration officials and others familiar with her thinking, and that he doesn't understand the nuances of immigration law. No, he doesn't. You're correct. It remains unclear, according to several people familiar with the situation, how much longer the relationship can last. But the strains illustrate the difficulty faced by Trump's subordinates, who are tasked with delivering policy solutions to match his most soaring promises. Why don't you just? Well, when I say why don't you just? Well, then why don't you just do it? Says Donald Trump. Just go do the thing. I'm an ideas guy. The president has a very rudimentary understanding. Maybe he doesn't even have that. A very rudimentary understanding of what the border is all about and how you secure it, said a former DHS staffer who worked closely with Nielsen. And she's also not one of the border fire eaters that have his ear right now. She is in an impossible no-win situation. Tensions between the two could soon flare again. The Border Patrol's May arrest numbers are due to be released early next month, and immigration hawks, including the president, now treat them as a kind of barometer for Nielsen's performance. Secretary Nielsen is vigorously advancing the president's agenda to secure this nation's borders against uncontrolled migration, drugs, gangs, terrorism, crime, and the theft of taxpayer dollars and American jobs. The White House senior policy advisor Stephen Miller said in a statement, she knows the threat, she understands the threat, and is undertaking bold action to confront it head on. Tyler Houlton, DHS spokesman, said the two are, quote, on the same page, adding any accusations to the contrary are simply false. Fake news, fake news. We know what happens when they allege that. It turns out within a week to be true. Nielsen brings a lawyerly, technocratic approach to an issue that animates the president like no other, with a passion dyed into the blood-red MAGA caps of his supporters. It's a very poetic way of saying they're all stupid. The night before Trump delivered his first speech to Congress in February of 2017, he huddled with Jared Kushner, noted genius, and Miller in the Oval Office to talk immigration, because that's Jared's thing, right? The president reluctantly agreed with suggestions he strike a gentler tone on immigration in the speech. Do you think he did it? Trump reminded them the crowds loved his rhetoric on immigrants along the campaign trail. Acting as if he was at a rally, he then read aloud a few made-up Hispanic names and described potential crimes they could have committed, like rape or murder. Then, he said, the crowds would roar when the criminals were thrown out of the country, as they did when he highlighted crimes by illegal immigrants at his rallies, according to a person present for the exchange, and another briefed on it later. Miller and Kushner laughed. Ha ha ha, wouldn't that be a funny State of the Union address? A senior White House official said that while the president did discuss the crowd enthusiasm for crackdowns on criminal aliens, he disputed that Trump used Hispanic names to illustrate the point. Yes, he did. Of course he did. Around the same time, Nielsen was complaining to colleagues and her then boss, DHS Secretary Kelly, about how the administration botched its travel plan. She panned the president's statement about the border wall, saying it was unlikely to ever be built. Kelly agreed. The two sometimes joked about it. In early 2017, Nielsen told at least two colleagues that the president's rhetoric made it more difficult to run the agency. Now, 5 months into her tenure as Homeland Security Secretary, the measures Nielsen has implemented, separating families, boosting arrests, increasing prosecutions, have made her a villain to many Democrats and immigrants' rights groups. And by the way, also made you a persona non grata in the Trump administration. So where the F do you think you have to go at this point, Kirsten? Quit. But they have not delivered the immediate results the president demands. And that's the problem with keeping your job. In April, the number of illegal border crossers arrested by U.S. agents topped 50,000 for the second consecutive month. The increase has stripped the president of one of his proudest accomplishments, a sharp drop in illegal migration in the months immediately following his 2016 win. It was cold, by the way. Trump has been in no mood to hear that migration patterns have returned to historic seasonal norms this spring, when it's warm, a trend occurring in part because the American economy is buzzing and U.S. farms, factories, and businesses are desperate for workers. Why are the farms desperate for workers? It's warm. It's growing season again. Instead, Trump has fumed at Nielsen, telling her to close the border, and growing impatient at her explanations of why that's not possible. He has also blamed her at times for not securing enough money to finish the border wall, even though she was not part of the spending deal struck by senior White House aides, and that the president signed, current and former administration officials said. Allies of Nielsen note that some of the president's gripes are with immigration judges that cannot process people quickly enough, caravans that cannot be immediately stopped by DHS due to asylum laws and international agreements. Oh, law. That's so annoying. In fact, Trump has grown more agitated when she has tried on several occasions to describe why she cannot do what he wants and what laws and budget mandates might prevent it. Mark Krikorian, head of the Center for Immigration Studies, the Washington think tank whose ideas about the benefits of restricting immigration have broad influence in the administration, said Trump wants Nielsen to deliver a crackdown that looks like the Iraq War. He wants to do shock and awe, said Krikorian. He doesn't realize this is World War I. This is trench warfare. I don't know if that's a better analogy or not. Calling Nielsen a Bush person is a label that casts doubt at both her loyalty to the president and his immigration agenda. But Nielsen's real problem current and former colleagues say, is that she is a Kelly person, and that she has few other allies in the White House except for the diminished chief of staff. It's the same thing we've seen happen with General Kelly, and he's not a general anymore, but okay. My suspicion is there are rogue people in the West Wing and former officials who got pushed out or who are running disinformation campaigns, said Blaine Rethmeyer, an ally of both. Well, interesting possibility, certainly. We'll return after this with a bit more on this. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I am convinced, increasingly convinced, that there's less and less of value at this point that we can mine out of the story of how abused Kirstjen Nielsen is. Although I was kind of hoping to get to that point in the article. I scroll down, I can find the "we're closed" exchange. But what else do you need to know about that? The president is a moron. And that's the very end of the article, actually. As Trump harangued Nielsen for more than 30 minutes in front of the cabinet this month, other aides grimaced and fidgeted. And I think Wilbur Ross slept. But nothing she said seemed to calm the president. Put on the Gorilla Channel. That would do it. According to people familiar with the meeting, "We're closed," Trump yelled at one point, referring to the border. This time, Kelly did not leap to her defense, and that brings us to the end of the article. I skipped a large part of it because, really, honestly, I'm not that sympathetic about Nielsen herself. But an important part of this and an important reminder of how blustery and stupid the president really is, and why don't you justism in the role that it plays in everything, and even in setting policy in this administration. All right, definitely a few other things that we have to touch on and stories to get to. And man, I've been holding Paula Appanese' piece here, which I think probably we'd do well to listen to, but it is rather lengthy. Not terrible, but it's going to take about 10 minutes of the 30 or so we have left. Let's see what we can do by way of informing you for the weekend and see if we can't just squeeze it in at some point here. A story I wanted to mention, and we don't have to say too much more about it other, I think, than the headline. Something from the Hill that I grabbed the other day. Of course, Donald Trump and his spy story, that he's got the imaginary spy from the guy from A Beautiful Mind, I suppose, is the one who was embedded in his campaign to spy on them, et cetera, et cetera. Just thought it would be worth at least putting the headline from this story that has the juicy bit on the record. Trump told confidant, I don't know who he was speaking to, one of his friends who he calls on his personal cell phone to the great dismay of the national security crowd. Trump told confidant he wanted to brand the FBI informant as a spy because he thought it would resonate with the media and the public. In other words, because he thought it was a juicier and more nefarious sounding story. That originally reported by the Associated Press in a rather dry toast accounting of it. But I think an important element that you need to have on the record. Trump knows that this isn't a spy and never was a spy. He just wants to say it because the "why don't you just" crowd will react differently to being told it was a spy. It was a spy. Well, it was an undercover, FBI informant. The same thing. No, not really. Feels like the same thing. No, not really. I want you to think it's the same thing. All right, fine. We will. All right. Other one I want to put on the record, though, deserves much more attention than we're able to give it, but you have to keep up because the weekend is coming. Michael Cohen, what else is he in trouble for? BBC reported the other day, Trump lawyer, quote, paid by Ukraine to arrange White House talks. He's still not registered as a foreign agent, but was taking, in this case, $400,000 in secret payments from the Ukrainian government to please set something up between us and Donald Trump. We got to get to talk to the guy, which, very interesting. Of course, Paul Manafort and Gates both in trouble for their ties to Ukraine. Michael Cohen got to have one too. It goes in depth. It's an important story. We don't have time to cover it, but just in case something happens over the weekend, you need to be aware of it in case you were not. In revisiting another storyline that I can never get my hands around entirely, network security. You remember we talked a little bit about that yesterday, and I've always wondered. At first I was just speculating because Kaspersky sounded Russian, and then of course it really turned out to be Russian, and then I thought, oh no, Russia and computer hacking and computer security, what if part of the problem has been we've all been convinced to put Kaspersky antivirus software on our computers, and we don't know what the F is in this software. What if it's full of viruses, or is a program that says if a Russian government virus gets into your computer, Kaspersky will ignore that and say, we got rid of 15 viruses. We got to say something, right? Got to say there were some viruses in the scan in order for people to believe us. Nobody's going to believe that there were zero. So some number of things, but it's, you know what it reminds me of was the revelation that the Uber map that shows you that there's cars in your area, right? You don't know that there's cars in your area. Your computer says there's cars in your area. Computers never lie and whatever. What if you program it to throw some cars in wherever you happen to be, whether they're close to you or not? Who's going to know the difference? So long as a car appears eventually, even if it takes twice as long as they said it was going to, what's the real harm in having faked up a map that shows that there's some cars there? You know, we're not going to sell you the car. You're not going to become the person in possession of the car. We'll just, you know, don't worry about it. There's lots of cars. They'll help, and they will show up. So most people have no basis for complaint, but it's disingenuous. Well, what if Kaspersky antivirus just says, yeah, we got rid of all the viruses. But it's actually programmed to allow, you know, a select few, and they can control which ones by giving you an update, and you will install that in your computer without knowledge. Anything coming from our friends in Russia, that will be ignored. We're going to say your computer's in great shape. It's just piping everything to Russia, and you don't know anything about it. Well, was that wild speculation? It was, until it started to turn out to be like, that might not be an accurate description of how the program works, but the federal government is very suspicious all of a sudden about Kaspersky, and eventually said, you know what? We think that might be the case. Everybody in the federal government, you know, because you have some interesting and important stuff, get rid of your Kaspersky and get a different virus software, you know, virus protection software. And no telling, of course, what's in that black box either, and they don't have to tell you because it's proprietary. Thanks very much, business law. But yeah, it's more of a problem getting rid of Kaspersky than we thought. Here's a story from the Daily Beast, and it's a goddamn exclusive, for Christ's sake. Just want to throw in some profanity for the hell of it. Exclusive. U.S. government can't get rid of Russian software. Why don't you just get rid of the Russian software? Well, Andrew Desiderio, I managed to say that one correctly, I think, and Kevin Poulsen have reported, hey, you can't get rid of it. Federal agencies are so far unable to comply with a law banning Kaspersky Lab software from U.S. government networks by October. Daily Beast has learned multiple divisions of the U.S. government are confronting the reality that code written by the Moscow-based security company is embedded deep within American infrastructure, in routers, firewalls, and other hardware, and nobody is certain how to get rid of it. It's messy. It's going to take way longer than a year, said one U.S. official. Congress didn't give anyone money to replace these devices, and the budget has no wiggle room to begin with. At issue is a provision of the National Defense Authorization Act enacted last December that requires the government to fully purge itself of any hardware, software, or services developed or provided in whole or in part by Kaspersky Lab. The law was a dramatic expansion of an earlier DHS, them again, directive that only outlawed Kaspersky-branded products. Both measures came months after months of saber-rattling by the U.S., which has grown increasingly anxious about Kaspersky's presence in federal networks in the wake of Russia's 2016 election interference campaign. Well, there's a lot to it. You should read through it. Welcome to your future. P.S. How would you like a ZTE phone? I can get it to you cheap. How come I can get it to you so cheap? I'll make it the cheapest smartphone on the market. And, that should be snapped up by all sorts of low-paid federal employees or members of the military, right? Because we want to keep costs low. How do I keep costs low? Why, the phone's subsidized by the government. Two governments, in fact. The Chinese government heavily subsidizes it first. And now, under Donald Trump, the American government will also give ZTE a fun leg up on your every move, I guess, essentially. And your ZTE phone will vacuum up everything there is to know about you and what you do for a living and let the Chinese know about it. No skin off your nose. The Russians already know, thanks to Kaspersky. We're doing great. What a fantastic outlook for the tech future here in the United States. All right. That ought to scare the hell out of you. One or two other pieces that I have got to get on the record. Man, let me do two quick ones here and just bring these up for future reading. One from Bloomberg, something you should know prior to the weekend, just in case something breaks. Jared Kushner. Kushner's cadre in talks with Saudi-backed SoftBank fund. Just want to put this on the record. Cadre, a real estate technology startup, co-founded and partly owned by White House senior advisor Jared Kushner, is discussing an investment of at least $100 million from a private fund that receives much of its capital from the governments of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. According to people familiar with these discussions, does it mean anything? Maybe not, but that's just one of the reasons why you should disinvest in, or separate yourself from these international business entanglements before taking up a role at the White House. But never mind that, because it didn't happen. A top executive at Cadre, the people said, has met privately in recent months with representatives of the SoftBank Vision Fund, a technology investment vehicle that gets almost half of its $100 billion from the Saudi government's public investment fund. The UAE has put at least $15 billion into the Vision Fund through its sovereign wealth fund as well. Kushner doesn't play an active role in Cadre's operations, company officials say when they were asked about that, but he hasn't divested from Cadre either. And he's got about something he describes it in his disclosure, which might not even be right, as valued at between $5 and $25 million. People close to Cadre, whose founders include Jared's younger brother Josh and his Harvard classmate Ryan Williams, said that neither Kushner has taken part in the recent funding discussions with SoftBank. It was SoftBank that approached Cadre, they added, which absolves no one of anything. So keep an eye on that one. SoftBank and Cadre, all tied, whether they want you to believe it or not, to Jared Kushner. Something to keep in mind. Also, another name to add to the rogues gallery. This time, another Israeli-linked intelligence firm to add to the roster next to, I guess, Black Cube, which came up not long ago. And I guess should be back in the news because Harvey Weinstein. This is the next offering on the list. Who is Joel Zamel, the Australian-Israeli linked to Mueller's Trump probe? The Israeli social media expert, allegedly linked to the Trump campaign through an online manipulation campaign, founded several companies, including one offering honey traps and deep web capabilities. This written by Alison Kaplan-Summer and running in Haaretz, the Israeli paper. The news that Special Counsel Robert Mueller dispatched FBI agents to the Middle East to interview witnesses and worked with the Israel police, rather, I was going to say Israeli police, but it says the Israel police, to seize computers affiliated with a company that specializes in social media manipulation, hit Israel like a bombshell. And you got to be careful when you talk about things hitting Israel like a bombshell. So they don't take it lightly. The name thrust into the spotlight by Saturday's New York Times report, it's a week old now, is that of Joel Zamel, Z-A-M-E-L, described as an Israeli social media expert. His company, Psy Group, we did mention him the other day, developed an online manipulation campaign that involved usage of thousands of fake social media accounts to help Trump get elected. Sounds familiar. Zamel, the Times reported, met Donald Trump Jr. together with George Nader, special advisor to the leadership of the United Arab Emirates, 3 months before the 2016 election and allegedly pitched his company expertise to help Trump defeat Hillary Clinton and discussed ways to help the Republican candidate's campaign through social media manipulation. Now, you might wonder why they would say, well, why should we pay you when we're already paying Cambridge Analytica to do the same thing? Well, we don't know whether it was the same thing or they supplemented each other's work or maybe they did overlap. I don't know. We're going to have to find out more. But as more information is developed about this Joel Zamel, you will have heard the name and it will prick up your ears. And I don't know why anybody would want to do that to their ears, but that's your business. And you'll know you heard the name, let's say, second on Kagro in the Morning. Now, it wasn't the first time Zamel's name has arisen in connection with the Mueller probe. I didn't even know that. On April 3rd, the Wall Street Journal reported that the Mueller team was examining the 9-year-old company owned by Zamel and his business partner Daniel Green, then a consulting firm called Wikistrat, like Wikipedia strategy, Wikistrat. The journal said that Wikistrat was contracted by the UAE beginning in 2015 to conduct war game scenarios on Islamist political movements in Yemen and had developed close relationships with the Emirates' security establishment and business community. According to the newspaper, the work included Wikistrat putting together a war game concerning the political situation in Yemen for the UAE and then briefed top Emirati national security officials on the results. Okay, so I just want to put that one sort of on the record and out there. And now, let me roll this piece. Hopefully we can actually squeeze it in. I think we still can. Paul Appanese on how to regard the trap sometimes that progressives set up for themselves on the issue of tolerance.
Hey, David. As we all struggle onward towards a resolution of the toxic Trump presidency, we're continually confronted by episodes of toxic behavior by Trump supporters of various stripes. And inevitably, debates erupt about how well-meaning people should respond. Shouldn't we be reaching out to these people? They're misguided, they're afraid, they're struggling, etc. We don't want to be like them, right? When they go low, we should go high, right? Hating haters just increases the hate, doesn't it? Isn't love the answer? I do think love is the answer in a big picture sense. But I think we need to make a distinction between the personal and the social political. On an interpersonal level, unconditional love towards people we know is worth striving for. But I don't think unconditional love is the same thing as unconditional acceptance of unacceptable behaviors. Think about being a parent. I'm going to generalize and say that a large part of parenting involves teaching children about the differences between acceptable and unacceptable behaviors. Now, on the social and political level, we often use the word tolerance to replace love, and we wonder how we can be tolerant of people whose political beliefs are not just different from our own, but are actively harmful. It's the paradox of tolerance, that the one thing tolerant people cannot tolerate is intolerance. Now, isn't that hypocritical? As a discussion raged on this topic in a tweet thread a few days ago, someone brought this article to my attention and I wanted to share it. It's by Jonathan Zunger. It's from January 2017, and it's called Tolerance is Not a Moral Precept. The title of this essay should disturb you. We have been brought up to believe that tolerating other people is one of the things you do if you're a nice person. Whether we learn this in kindergarten or from biblical maxims like love your neighbor as yourself and do unto others. But if you have ever tried to live your life this way, you will have seen it fail. Why won't you tolerate my intolerance? This comes in all sorts of forms, accepting a person's actively antisocial behavior because it's just part of being an accepting group of friends, being told that prejudice against Nazis is the same as prejudice against black people, watching people try to give equal time to a religious or irreligious group whose guiding principle is that everyone must join them or else. Every one of these examples should raise your suspicions that something isn't right, that tolerance be damned, one of these things is not like the other. But if you were raised with an intense version of tolerance is a moral requirement, then you may feel that this is a thought that you should fight off. It isn't. Tolerance is not a moral absolute. It is a peace treaty. Tolerance is a social norm because it allows different people to live side by side without being at each other's throats. It means that we accept that people may be different from us in their customs, in their behavior, in their dress, in their sex lives, and that if this does not directly affect our lives, it is none of our business. But the model of a peace treaty differs from the model of a moral precept in one simple way. The protection of a peace treaty only extends to those willing to abide by its terms. It is an agreement to live in peace, not an agreement to be peaceful no matter the conduct of others. A peace treaty is not a suicide pact. When viewed through this lens, the problems above have clearer answers. The antisocial member of the group who harms other people in the group on a regular basis need not be accepted. The purpose of your group's acceptance is to let people feel that they have a home, and someone who actively tries to thwart this is incompatible with the broader purpose of that acceptance. Prejudice against Nazis is not the same as prejudice against black people because one is based on people's stated opposition to their neighbors' lives and safety, the other on a characteristic that has nothing to do with whether they will live in peace with you or not. Freedom of religion means that people have the right to have their own beliefs, but you have that same right. You are under no duty to tolerate an attempt to impose someone else's religious laws on you. This is a variation on the old saw, that is, your right to swing your fist ends where my nose begins. We often forget, or ignore, that no right is absolute, because one person's right can conflict with another's. This is why freedom of speech doesn't protect extortion, and the right to bear arms doesn't license armed robbery. Nor is this limited to rights involving the state. People can interfere with each other's rights with no government involved, as when people use harassment to suppress other people's speech. While both sides of that example say they are exercising their free speech, one of them is using their speech to prevent the others. These are not equivalent. The balance of rights has the structure of a peace treaty. Unlike absolute moral precepts, treaties have remedies for breach. If one side has breached another's rights, the injured party is no longer bound to respect the treaty rights of their assailant. And their response is not an identical violation of the rules, even if it looks superficially similar to the original breach. "Mommy, Tommy hit me back" holds no more ethical weight among adults than it does among children. After a breach, the moral rules which apply are not the rules of peace, but the rules of broken peace and the rules of war. We might ask, is the response proportional? Is it necessary? Does it serve the larger purpose of restoring the peace? But we do not take an invaded country to task for defending its borders. Take the example of a group silencing another using harassment. Many responses may be appropriate. Returning harassment in turn, for example, is likely to be proportional, although it is rarely effective. Harassment usually occurs in a situation where the sides do not have equal power to harm each other in that way. On the other hand, acting to restrict the harasser's ability to continue in the future, even at the expense of limiting their rights to speak, may be both proportional and effective. But lining the aggressors up against a wall and shooting them would not only be disproportionate, it would be unlikely to restore the peace. No side, after all, will ever accept a peace in which their most basic needs are not satisfied, their safety and their power to ensure that safety most of all. The desire for justice is a desire that we each have such mechanisms to protect ourselves, while still remaining in the context of peace. That the rule of law, for example, will provide us a remedy for breaches without having to entirely abandon all peace. Any peace which does not satisfy this basic requirement, one which creates an existential threat to one side or the other, can never hold. If we interpreted tolerance as a moral absolute, or if our rules of conduct were entirely blind to the situation and to previous actions, then we would regard any measures taken against an aggressor as just as bad as the original aggression. But through the lens of a peace treaty, these measures have a different moral standing. They are tools which can be used to restore the peace. The model of a peace treaty highlights another challenge which tolerance always faces. peace is not always possible because sometimes people's interests are fundamentally incompatible. Setting aside the obvious example of, I think you and your family should be dead, even though that example may be far more common than we wish, there are many cases where such fundamental incompatibility can arise despite good faith on all sides. As with any peace treaty, we must consider toleration in the broader context of the war, which is its alternative, and we must recognize that peace is not always a possibility. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip over the next several paragraphs, although I encourage you to follow the link that David will provide to the piece later. It's on Medium. To summarize, Zunger talks about the problems we face when incompatible sides both operate in good faith, but see each other as existential threats, as in the clash between fundamentalists and the rest of us. He caps that with a little bit about the religious wars that were going on in Europe from 1524 to 1648. They ended with the Treaty of Westphalia, about which he says, "The Peace of Westphalia was the political foundation for the concept of secularism, that religious matters are so uncertain that the state should not have the power to mandate them. It remains one of the classic peace treaties between fundamentally incompatible groups. It was also, in turn, the basis for the concept of religious freedom brought by European settlers to North America. The American Bill of Rights is its direct descendant." And then he says, "What this teaches us is that tolerance, viewed as a moral absolute, amounts to renouncing the right to self-protection, but viewed as a peace treaty, it can be the basis of a stable society. Its protections extend only to those who would uphold it in turn. To withdraw those protections from those who would destroy it does not violate its moral principles. It is fundamental to them, because without this enforcement, the treaty would collapse. It's appropriate, even ethical, to answer force with proportional force when that force is required to restore a just peace. We seek peace because on the whole it is far better than war, but as history has taught us, not every peace is better than the war it prevents." I want to conclude with a couple of quick thoughts. First, I really like the idea of tolerance as a peace treaty versus tolerance as a moral precept requiring us to renounce our own rights to self-protection. Second, I like looking at the breaches of tolerance as expressed by white supremacists and Trumpers and so on as unacceptable breaches of the peace, which should be met with proportional reprisals. And finally, Zunger notes that sometimes peace simply isn't possible because the sides have incompatible goals. That's the story with the Republican Party at this time. They have shown themselves to be bad faith actors, and they are breaching the compact of our democracy every day. They gotta go. So, let's keep working on that blue wave. Thanks for listening. This is Paula at paulawriter.com.
Thank you, Paula. And yes, we did just manage to fit that one in. We're going to have to close things out for the week with, we're on to the next school shooting. I thought I should probably update you about that one. That happened this morning in Noblesville, Indiana, the heartland of the United States, where they threw God out of everything. I don't know exactly how that happened. 2 are in critical condition in a shooting at Noblesville West Middle School, so we got to stay on top of that situation. No more to report for you on that one. We're going to have to just watch as things develop. An interesting comment by Michael Musson that came in an hour or so ago, saying that it makes sense to him. I thought this was a great observation. Makes sense to me. He says that the Trump plan to fix immigration is to degrade the ability to measure the problem. I think probably just about right, although I don't ever credit Donald Trump for coming up with strategies like that one. And I guess one more thing that I will toss your way and include in the roundup if I can. We mentioned the other day that I guess there's a bit of a campaign on to, let's say, reevaluate the value of the information being presented by anti-Trump activists, the Krasenstein brothers. And I see Lachlan Markay, who I don't know that would be necessarily my go-to source for information about the Krasensteins, but interesting tweet out there, OMFG, he says, the Krasensteins were actually pro-Trump back when they found out he was running a pyramid scheme. Interesting, he retweets something compiled by another Twitter personage known as Jimmy Princeton, who has screenshots of some 2009 articles by one of the Krasenstein brothers, anyway, Brian Krasenstein, discussing Trump's new MLM, multi-level marketing scheme, and like, hey, maybe this would be a great way to get rich quick. I mean, granted, he wasn't a politician then yet, but most people knew he was full of crap and someone to be avoided, but I guess they didn't. Well, live and learn. You can evaluate that for whatever it's worth. And now, time to stay tuned for Justice Putnam and the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Here's what he's got on tap for you today. Of course, something we missed today. Starting off at the beginning of the show, following ours, former federal prosecutor John Flannery rips John Kelly and the new lawyer, Emmett Flood. Why? For crashing the Gang of Eight meeting. Yeah, they had no business whatsoever. Huge story, and we didn't even get to touch on it today. Then, white supremacists behind the violent Charlottesville rally last year now face lawsuits with major implications, and a couple of them finally
From
convicted
Daily Co's Radio,
in those beatings,
on
too.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show.
With David Waldman.
The Senate Judiciary Committee votes to advance 3 controversial judicial nominees who would not tell senators whether they believe Brown v. Board was correctly decided. And slamming due process, Trump complains, we're the only country that has judges. What? How about this? More on where AT&T might have avoided the scandal over its Michael Cohen payments if the company had just listened to investors.